Hi, folks. I'm Michael Munson with Forge, and I'm happy to have everybody be here today and have this conversation about gender expression and staying safe in the time of COVID. We are going to be a little bit more casual today than some of our Ask events. At least I think we're going to be. We'll figure it out as we move along. But we're glad that you're all here. And let me just quickly introduce our kind of mini panel of people today and set up some housekeeping stuff. So with us today is Shelley Gregory from Forge's staff and Joanna Woodbury from the Medical College of Wisconsin Inclusion Health Clinic. And then we have our wonderful interpreter, Jill, who is just Fabu in purple today, teal background. We were discussing the background before, so it's great to have all of you with us today. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We want to make sure that we thank our funder. We're on a 6-month, really compacted project with the Medical College that was funded through the Advancing a Healthier Wisconsin endowment at the Medical College of Wisconsin. So we are excited for that funding and for the work that we've been doing between Forge and the Medical College of Wisconsin's Inclusion Health Clinic. And that's a really big mouthful every time I say it. So it'll get better. We'll get better for sure. We are going to be recording. We are recording today's session so that folks that are not here can experience it later if they wish to listen to it. So if that alters how you wish to ask questions or interact today, please know that it's recorded. We have on other recordings snipped out some identifying bits of information. So if you ask something and later want to be edited out, we can definitely do that. You can see that there's an ASL interpreter. Hopefully you can. I just wanted to go over a couple of Zoom features. So we're in a webinar platform, which is a little bit different than a meeting platform. So hopefully you are seeing on your screen right now 4 different people, Joanna, me, Shelley, and Jill. If you are not, you can switch back and forth between the speaker view and the gallery view, which is generally in the top right corner of your screen. If you want to pin only one person, you can pin a person by hovering over their image and doing those 3 little dots and then choosing to pin them. So if you only want to see Jill, the interpreter, you can choose that for one example. And Jill is fantastic to look at. So why would you not want to see Jill and her signing? So it's great. The other things in terms of how to interact with us, you can interact in a couple of ways. One is to raise your hand and then we'll unmute you. So why don't we practice that just to make sure that we can all find the raise hand. Can folks raise your hands? Excellent. Look at all you really smart people. Excellent. Way cool. Perfect. And then the other way is through the chat box. So I accidentally also have a Q&A box. Let's use the chat box instead. So if everybody can find the chat box, and why don't you type in, what is one of your favorite outdoor activities? So somebody's saying walking, hiking, biking, camping, climbing, rollerblading. That sounds dangerous to me, but it sounds fun. Tree climbing. Perfect. Those are great answers. So folks have found the chat box. That's perfect. And then at the end of our time today, I'm going to share what's coming up for ACT and Connect programs. But why don't we get started with talking about gender expression and how to stay safe or safer in this time of COVID-19. As we start, I would love it if Shelley and Joanna, if you could do a brief introduction of who you are and what you're bringing to today's discussion. You can pick who's going to go first. Shelley, I think that's you.
Thanks, Michael. And thank you, Joanna, for letting me go first. So as Michael said, I'm Shelley Gregory. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, or any pronouns are fine. I work at Forge with Michael. I'm our strategic project coordinator, which in reality means that I do a range of things, but that range of things includes working with lots of trans and non-binary people in the city of Milwaukee and across the state of Wisconsin, and connecting folks to resources and helping folks get the things that they need.
Excellent, thank you. Joanna, do you want to let us know what you do and who you are?
Joanna Woodbury. I use any respectful pronoun. I direct social services for the HIV care
Great. And Joanna, just for the future, your sound is a lot quieter than Shelley's. So
Okay,
I don't know if you can either project or get super close or something.
I will speak loudly. Is that better?
That's perfect. Yes, thank you. And I think we're going to have a conversation today more so than a presentation. And I think I would like to participate in that conversation because I think it will make it a little bit more exciting or more boring depending on how we look at things. But I'm wondering if we can start with talking about masks, since that's one of the things that can really impact how we express our gender, because it's going to be covering up something that's oftentimes a gendered cue. Do Shelley or Joanna want to start with kind of how that plays out for folks and what some of the strategies might be around how to express our gender given safety precautions?
Sure. I mean, I've given a little bit of thought to this, you know, both for myself and for some folks that, you know, I've been working with and talking to about some of these issues. And yeah, I mean, I think we know that, like, there are definitely some challenges that we may be facing right now in the various forums that we're using to communicate. And as things maybe start to open up a little bit more and we start going back out into the world in person, or some of us may be already having to still spend a lot of time out in person, particularly if we're working or we've been doing essential work during this period. So, you know, and wearing the cloth masks is certainly still a recommendation that the CDC has given all of us to try to block some of the, you know, particulate that may come out of our mouths if we potentially have the virus and don't know it. And so I, you know, from my personal perspective, I'm going to keep wearing a cloth mask. And I think that is, you know, a recommendation that we may want to try to follow as much as we can. But yeah, I mean, it really poses some issues, and it poses issues for lots of different kinds of folks. I've been seeing some interesting things online recently in the deaf communities and with deaf and hard of hearing folks who are starting to develop some masks that have see-through kind of plastic, maybe screens in them so that folks' mouths can be seen while they're speaking. And I think, you know, that kind of idea, I mean, certainly had me thinking about our community and trans folks. And, you know, we certainly know that, you know, how we present ourselves in the world is, you know, can be very, very meaningful and important to us, and how others perceive us. You know, we know, you know, also is, it's very meaningful. You know, so how do we continue to sort of present ourselves and express ourselves and hopefully communicate who we are if we have to be maybe covering parts of our bodies and particularly our faces? You know, and I don't know that I have any, after all of this talking, have any great answers for that. And I think Michael and Joanna will also be very interested to hear what others have to contribute today. But, you know, some of the thoughts I've had, you know, particularly in online forums, you know, if we feel like covering our face might mean that we're covering some aspect of us that is important normally for us to share, to kind of signal to others who we are, whether that might be, you know, facial hair that we do want to be showing and have people noticing, if, you know, we're wearing a beard or a goatee or you know, long sideburns, something like that, or if we're wearing makeup, you know, makeup on our faces or lipstick, and, you know, those things may be obscured. And so how do we signal who we are? I think in our online forums there's some interesting ways of doing that, and I've been trying to use some of those. One is my you know, and I mentioned this earlier to Michael, I right away, you know, we can download Zoom, the app, and have an app on our phone or our computers that's always there. and we can program in our name. We can type our name in the way that we want it to appear, the name we use, and we can use those namespaces to add additional information like I've done on mine. So I use the last name field in the Zoom form to put Forge, where I work, and to also show my pronouns. And so every time I log on to a Zoom meeting from any of my devices, my name and my pronouns are already there. And I found that to be super helpful, and you know, even helpful in talking to others and having that cue from folks about what their pronouns are. And you know, I have some more thoughts, but I'll see what others have to say as well.
So I am someone who has to wear a mask about 10 hours a day because I work in a space that requires it. And I think we're in a difficult space now because often it's not the CDC recommends it, but it is you want to enter this building, you need to have a mask on. And so that choice has been taken from us. It's been taken from me. I have to have a mask when I walk into a building, and I spend the day in it. So we've lost a lot in that as a community and just as humans. We forget how much emotion and self-expression just comes from this part of our face. Engaging with someone when you can't see that really does change how we interpret each other and how we understand the words that are being said, because I can say the same words, and if you can't see a pretty significant part of my face, what those words mean might mean something different. And I think that's just an example of how much this takes from us in terms of how we put ourselves out there. And I am really thoughtful in how we use masks to cover that part of us, but also how we can do it in a meaningful way to express who we are. So I have 9 masks because I wear one every day, and then I save one in my car for the grocery. And my masks are really distinctly different. On the days where I'm like, yes, I can do this, I wear my cute little hedgehog mask. On my days where I am like, do not speak to me, right? I have a funky little like burgundy mask with yellow dots that for me is just more like that. So I'm trying to find fabrics that can express some part of me in a way that I can't when I'm covered. We've also started from so I started, the people who work for me were not initially pleased about it, in wearing a picture of myself smiling, at least when I'm at work. But I'm not actually adverse to wearing it generally because it makes me human again, right? Like if you can't see this, but you can see that there's humanity. So it's like a picture, it's a 3x5 picture that we've laminated, and I wear it the entire time I'm at work when my face is covered. And everybody that I asked to do that was really frustrated with me because lots of people, myself included, do not like having our pictures taken. But we found that when we really did lose that capacity to share who we were, this became so valuable. So I think it actually has become something that people are starting to value and appreciate without realizing that it was going to happen that way. And I've started to see, similarly, as Shelley mentioned, the masks that have those openings, which like initially can be a little disconcerting, but then it's kind of fantastic because it really does take some of that barrier away from the entire experience of just being blocked, right? We're so physically divided from each other, and everything we can do to try and like connect, even if it's just visually, is so important right now.
Those are really great things. Both of you have made me think of 2 experiences that I've had recently with non-trans people, but it reminded me of how their masks were very gendered, and they were both expressing really gendered cues. We had our boiler at our house replaced, and one of the people wearing a mask was this, stereotypical macho, manly man kind of person, and he had a camo mask. It was, like in camo, I'm gonna go out in the woods kind of mask. And I'm like, wow, how appropriate. It was like in line with his gender expression. I mean, he could have been trans, but I don't think he was. So that was one example of like, oh, that's really expressing his masculinity in a way that, you know, a plain cloth white mask or something doesn't. And then I was on a board meeting call the other day, and again, this was a non-trans woman who identifies herself as a diva, but she had on, she was working at her office where she had to have a mask on, and her mask was bright pink, and it had like satin sewn edges around it, so the satin was kind of like sparkly. And for her, her femininity, her femness, her diva-ness is a huge part of her identity. And it was like, there was kind of like, you know, no doubt that this person was expressing her feminine, you know, gender, her gender identity. So that was just like, you know, two examples that I saw where they were like, oh, well, how does that translate for trans people? Like if somebody really wants to send, you know, I want you to see me as the gender that I am, you know, we don't necessarily all like pink or satin, but that does send a message that others may pick up on and respond to us in a different way. Or if we have a camo mask, people may respond to that way. Now, it obviously doesn't, it's not a foolproof way, but, you know, we may want to kind of exaggerate based on the stereotypical norms of what gender is. So I find that kind of interesting. Other thoughts about how we might be, you know, staying safe by using masks and still allowing us to have other people see us as the gender that we are.
I noticed someone in the comment box mentioned just being really thoughtful about the clothing that we choose, so that, right, like our entire person is not here, and taking that space to just to show who we are, maybe more intentionally than we would in another setting or another time.
Exactly, right. Because I think, again, you know, it's like we may want to choose to present a little bit more in a certain way, to be perceived in a certain way, even if it's not necessarily our normal gender expression. We may want to exaggerate a little bit to have that play out. So from head to toe, we may want to have a specifically gendered appearance. And I see someone is mentioning, you know, like wearing a pronoun pin. So like Joanna, like you were mentioning having a picture. Well, yeah, you could have a picture. A little bit weird maybe at first, but, you know, that sends a message. But we could also have pronoun pins that also send that message. So one of the questions that we all had talked about as staff ahead of time were things like, a lot of us, Joanna, don't have 9 masks, right? You know, like we don't have to
Right.
wear things, or we can't afford to have them. And so what happens, you know, when they get dirty? What happens if we get lipstick on them? And, you know, how can we, you know, continue to have our off-mask face be the way we want it to be, but we might be getting them dirty and we only have 1 mask. So Shelley and I were talking earlier, and this is not our forte. So we are depending on you, Joanna, to tell us all how to get lipstick out of a mask.
I have a trick. I don't actually wear lipstick, but I have counseled and it has been successful. So I will say I have 9 masks now, yes, because I was washing 1 mask every single night for weeks. And that's just tedious. And I was making my own masks, so I had some flexibility there. So when we're washing masks in general, this is just like a quick tutorial. We should be washing them by hand, if ever possible. And I usually just use a salad bowl, and you put a tablespoon of dish soap and a teaspoon of bleach. The bleach is important in this if we can, because it does the job in killing anything that's there that dish soap would not. And so warm water, and I mix those things up, and I throw whatever masks need to be washed in, and I smush them around, let them sit for 5-10 minutes. Then I pull them out and let them hang dry. And then the other thing that I do that is helpful in just making sure we've killed anything that's on it is iron it. One, because it puts it back into shape, but that high heat helps from a public health infection perspective. If you have lipstick on your mask, or other things, right? Who knows? You can use hydrogen peroxide alongside with water. So if you do a 1-to-1 solution, the key there is do not dry it ever. Because if you add the heat to it, it calcifies it and it stains everything. You'll never get it out again. So if you have that experience, I would wash it first, because you'd be surprised how much the bleach is going to get out anyway. And it's not such a high bleach content that it make the colors go away. It's just enough to kind of do the job. And then do the hydrogen peroxide solution, and then hang dry. And it's pretty cool. You'll like the hydrogen peroxide, it just, I mean, you can watch it. It's like it just pulls it right out of the fabric. And then once you've done that, I'd rinse it and then hang dry. I'm sorry. So you're running it through a couple different chemicals, rinse it in some nice warm water, and then hang dry and then iron. Don't iron until you're sure that the hydrogen peroxide did everything you wanted, because again, if you add heat to it and there's anything left in there, it'll stain it. It kind of looks like when you've worn boots outside and walked through a bunch of salt, it leaves kind of those marks.
I find this fascinating. I am so glad you had an answer, because we didn't, we didn't prep for this. So, and Shelly and I were going, oh my God, we are not going to have an answer to this question. So
it actually works on mascara as well. Excellent. And you really got to, I mean, you got to go to town on the mascara, especially if it's like water resistant, but it works.
That's cool. So if people are wearing foundation or blush or lipstick or lip gloss or any kind of things like that, or even if they're using like a stipple brush to do, a beard or a mustache. So any of those things would probably work with your method.
Yep.
Way cool. We will write this up for folks later, because I think that's an excellent little tip sheet of how to do that. And so then people can go back and look at that, which is really cool. Excellent. So I was also thinking about, so we're wearing masks, or we're encouraged to wear masks. And I know that some folks are also wearing gloves, like when they go to the grocery store, or they're being asked to wear gloves if they work in a job that that's required. And I was thinking that a lot of trans women in particular, but a lot of gender diverse folks wear fingernail polish. And so wearing gloves is going to cut off that piece of their gender expression. So I'm curious if you or Shelly, Shelly or Joanna, if you have ideas of some alternatives or some options that people might have, again, if that part of their gender identity is covered up.
So I've seen a couple really creative responses to that. I know an individual who is skilled in this area and actually does henna on their gloves on the top, not the bottom, because that can, I mean, really gloves are just your hands. Like if you put gloves on and do all the things and touch your face, it's the equivalent of not wearing gloves and not washing your hands and touching your face. But if you're required to wear them, this individual does henna on their gloves, and I think for them it is also a bit therapeutic in like the act of it, right? That's there's some detail to that takes some almost meditative quality in being able to do that. And then I've seen a couple other people. We're at a space now where Amazon does have things that they didn't have before, and there's some really funky disposable gloves out there. In different patterns and different colors, and I've started to see those out and about, and they're so uniquely different that you notice them pretty quickly. I saw these really fun marble style ones with like pink and purple, and like they just kind of pop at you, kind of in the same way that polish or other kind of rings and bracelets, all the things that we're losing by that. So trying to add some decoration that way.
Nice. Shelly, do you have other thoughts around gloves and ways of helping that gender expression kind of shine through?
Yeah, I really appreciate Joanna's suggestions, and I'm not sure I have a whole lot to add to that, other than to say that I certainly have seen, lots of places where we might find some examples, like Joanna was talking about. So if we have access to the internet, which presumably most of us do since we're here today, but like Pinterest, for example, and this predates even COVID, that there are lots and lots of crafty folks who have like done some really amazing things with gloves, including what Joanna was just saying, like almost maybe giving them cuffs and being able to add some decoration around the wrist and the arm as well. And so, and I don't know what Joanna thinks about that in terms of, sort of a safety, from a safety perspective, but they're certainly fabulous looking.
Well, and I think when we're looking at, gloves for I don't want to say more casual use, but if we're going to the grocery store, it's a
Right.
little bit different than obviously a medical provider who needs to
Right.
wear gloves for a very different specific reason. And you're not going to want to spend a lot of time doing henna on the back of them because you're going to be ripping them off in 10 minutes or 5 minutes. So I think there's a difference in where we're using them or what our occupation is. But yeah, and I'm looking at the chat too, and the reminders that sometimes when those things are covered up, when our face is covered up or when our hands are covered up, we again may want to send overt gender symbols of like wearing a necktie if we want to express stereotypical masculinity. And again, obviously anybody can wear a tie no matter what their gender is, or wearing a skirt. Those things send a message to other people. They may not be in line with our gender expression, but it may be about what we want other people to see and respond to, that we may want to take those steps just for that affirmation piece of it, even if it's not totally in line with where we're at.
Yeah, well, and I might encourage folks to think about headwear. I'm a big hat fan, and I don't always wear them on these calls, but I've got several different hats, in the way that Joanna has 9 masks that I'm still really impressed by. But I wear a different hat often to appropriate for different contexts, or even depending on how I feel. And sometimes depending on what I might want to communicate. And certainly we're talking about using, as you said, Michael, some of these kind of socially constructed symbols, and maybe we're using them in a way to kind of hyper express, or maybe try to over express to compensate for some of the challenges in communicating right now. But I can switch to my my Brewers hat, or my like football team hat, or what do we our chat box has suggestions of pride, well, right, like pride themed hats, a rainbow hat, or a trans pride themed hat. I think those are all great suggestions.
Exactly. And I think in our culture, like baseball caps tend to be red is very masculine. So if that's the gender that you would like people to see you as, under that big umbrella of masculinity, baseball caps are great for that. Just like scarves are oftentimes like colorful, like silky, not winter scarves, but like decorative scarves are oftentimes seen as really feminine. So again, broad range of femininity, but those two things are generally pretty cheap for people to get. You can get baseball caps for a couple of dollars. Scarves you can get at dollar stores. I don't think dollar stores are open, but you can get them places that are really cheap, and they really send that kind of strong message of at least that bi-gendered kind of piece of things. So it may not fully capture somebody's complex gender, but it's going to send at least one cue to the outward world. I'm wondering if we can switch gears a little bit and talk about folks who are binding, and what may happen, both because it's spring and people might have allergies, which sometimes makes binding more difficult, or people may have coronavirus and maybe coughing a lot, and binding might not feel very comfortable or possible during that time, but that obviously is going to affect their gender expression or how people perceive them. So what do folks think about that use of binding, or how folks can maintain their gender expression in a masculine way?
Some of the suggestions that I would maybe offer are ones that are, again, not really new to COVID or to this particular period of time. But we certainly know that there are some ways of, not using a binder if we're in a place where we feel like it might be restricting our breathing a little too much. And I think, Michael, as you very aptly point out, we know that our pulmonary systems are affected, and our respiratory systems, by COVID, and that the cough is a very common feature, perhaps a severe cough. And I can imagine that binding might end up being pretty darn uncomfortable under those circumstances. And, you know, and so some things that people sometimes do other times when they're sick, or, you know, maybe want to have like some compression, but still maybe have a little more flexibility than a binder might offer. You know, there are lots and lots of like newer kinds of fabrics, obviously, and companies that are producing lots and lots and lots of even just really like mainstream, you know, for mainstream use, compression type clothing. So in addition to some of the older options that we have, and that, you know, may or may not feel comfortable for folks who are binding, like kind of going back to something that maybe is a little more in the category of a traditional kind of bra. And so like a lot of folks will use sports bras, right, that are mostly elastic and, you know, will not be, obviously won't offer the same compression, but are, you know, much more comfortable for breathing. So that option is there for some folks. I really like using compression shirts. Like if I want to have some, you know, flattening, and but you know, want to feel very loose and comfortable. And compression shirts come in all different styles, t-shirt styles, you know, tank styles. What do we still call them, muscle shirts, when, you know, t-shirt without sleeves. So, you know, those come in lots of different styles, and the nice thing about them is that they are, you know, they are accessible, and certainly there's quite a price range, and so there are like much higher end sort of compression materials for sports activities. You know, we can also go to much lower cost like department stores, like a Target, and find, you know, in the athletic section, generally in the section that's labeled, you know, with clothes marketed for men, you know, compression t-shirts and things like that that are available for, you know, maybe $15. So that, you know, that may help us a little bit, but, you know, probably be a lot more comfortable.
Joanna, do you have other thoughts on comfort and safety?
No, I think that was really comprehensive. The one thing I would acknowledge is, even separate from a cough, we have many people who have experienced just a tightness of the chest, and that sensation can be really a little ambiguous sometimes, right? For people, it's like, well, it could be allergies, I have asthma, like I can't quite sort it out what that is. And so how that contributes to compression and, you know, any of the options that Shelley talked about is just something to consider.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember back to a time when I was binding, and I didn't bind very often, but I know for a lot of time I would spend basically kind of just covering things up. I would wear like a flannel shirt and leave it open so that the way the shirt would hang, I could have a t-shirt on, sometimes more than one t-shirt on, but then a shirt that would kind of be a little bit bigger, but it would just hang in a way that it would kind of have a line that looked different. So you can play around with, do plaids or solids make your chest look flatter in profile? Darker shirts tend to make it your chest look flatter than like a white or a light colored shirt. So even if, you know, the compression vests or the compression shirts might feel uncomfortable, there's a way just to try to minimize that the appearance of your chest into a more flat kind of profile, just by what color and style of clothes we wear. Not a perfect solution, but, you know, just something else to consider. Not rocket science with these ideas either.
Well, and you know, in that vein, I'd probably throw in as well, I'm actually a fan. If y'all don't mind seeing my binder, I'll look. No, I'm not wearing one right now, but I often will wear over my binder even, or without my binder, just a tank undershirt. That what are they called? A-shirts, maybe. And so it, you know, it almost fits the profile of the binder, But you know, they come a little higher sometimes in the neckline. And you know, putting them over a binder is nice because they're generally really thin. And they, you know, you won't see this because I have strategically placed my camera to obscure something that I'm not always a fan of, which is the line across my chest from the binder, in the way that it, you know, the extra material tends to gather there. Um, and so, you know, I often use one of those tank t-shirts on top of the binder because it's so light to like flatten the lines and the seams of the binders. And those are often then what I end up wearing when I come home under my clothes, because the first thing I do is take off my binder. And want to get comfortable. And so I'll often throw on one of those tanks, and they sometimes even have a little bit of stretchiness to them. So, you know, I'm not going to lie, that thing is not providing a great deal of support. And, you know, it's certainly not compressing, but putting that even under a t-shirt, and then maybe, like you said, right, like layering a, you know, a button down shirt that's open over it, you know, it makes me feel like there's still kind of something helping with my line and my chest, but you know, it's just so much more comfortable. And I sleep in those too.
And that's perfect. And obviously this is, you know, my comment now is going to be not related to COVID, but like, you know, I think those of us that, you know, do bind, it's important for all of us to have some freedom of our chest tissue. So yeah, if we can feel comfortable enough with ourselves to unbind when we get home, that's really helpful to, you know, allow our tissues to breathe, and you know, to allow our lungs to breathe more fully, no matter if we are sick with COVID or if we're fully very healthy. So those are good things. Let me switch the channel again. What about things like hair and beauty salons and barber shops? A lot of them are closed right now. A lot of people's gender expression relates to how their beard is trimmed, how their hair is trimmed, if they have braids. What do we, you know, what do folks do to maintain their, you know, their hair, if they have it, and their beautiness?
Well, so you know, my box lit up, I guess, because I chuckled. So I guess I can talk. But you know, some of the things that I've sort of observed and are seeing folks do is and some sources that are available for some products and things, like, you know, if stores are closed, you know, number one, you know, can we access the health and beauty products that we want to? You know, something I mentioned to Michael earlier, you know, obviously we can get makeup products, again, in a whole range, right, of cost and perhaps arguably quality. And, you know, if we can't go into our specialty store in the mall right now because it's not open, you know, department stores, a lot of department stores are doing like free and discounted shipping. So if we don't want to go into a store, you know, a place like a Target, a place like that, you know, has health and beauty products that, you know, even if they're not the regular products we use, you know, are still available to help with some of these things. And, you know, I believe Target's doing free shipping if you spend $35. And I think it's even like 2-day shipping. So, you know, that's a way to access some of these products. You know, in terms of our hair care and hair maintenance, I mean, but, you know, I think that's one of the most challenging things, you know, that I've experienced and that a lot of folks are experiencing. You know, there's certainly one way to deal with that, which is to cut one's hair. I see Joanna has more skill than I do because I can only do one haircut.
Oh no! This is 6 weeks of growth.
Oh, okay.
It's coming off today.
Ah, very good, very good. I'll look forward to a photo. But you know, certainly one of the things we've seen a lot of is folks coloring their hair at home. You know, whether it's something we do regularly or maybe something, you know, we'll just do to mix things up a little bit. And again, like, those products can be purchased in grocery stores or department stores at, certainly cost, but relatively much lower cost than going to a salon for that service. And folks are doing that at home, and there's tons and tons and tons of how-tos and videos about how to do some of those things at home with limited resources.
Excellent.
I think this is an interesting thing because regardless of your gender identity, everyone's experiencing it. So we're watching people everywhere appear differently than they would usually represent themselves. In some cases, people look a little haggard, or we just look different as a society because we lack some of the personal care things that we've trusted others to do for us. I would say, so while I took the route, so until about 7 weeks ago, I had purple, pretty long hair, and I just took the route of shaving it off. But I am in charge of other people's appearances in my home as well. And I would actually say that, yes, some of our bigger stores are able to supply us with that, but we have found that lots of our little stores that we trust really closely. One of my family members has a very specific need in some areas of how hair is done. And our local tiny little shops are actually doing pickup, right? So I was persistent. I had to call a couple of them, but found one that was like, yes, we would love to sell this to you. And, we'll arrange that you can come and we put it on the doorknob and you take it off. And so we're finding new creative ways to care for ourselves and for others, physical appearance, but there is a time for creativity apparently, which is now, and there's ways to at least get us closer to how we want to appear as we go through this. Because even when things do lift in Milwaukee County and the other counties that maintain shelter at home rule, it's not like we're all going to be in the salon the day it opens either. We've got a while now, whether it's a wait list or when we feel ready to be out in that space again. So trusting ourselves to use this as best we're able to kind of try and keep up with representing who we are. Hair is so important in how we express ourselves and how other people perceive us. It's really, I mean, it's sociologically very interesting when you change your hair abruptly, how people shift in their expectations of how they're going to interact with you, at least initially. So it's something to be honored.
And I think what you said, Joanna, is really fascinating because, we are living in this time where a lot of us are buzzing our hair, femme-identified, masculine-identified, gender fluid, anything. Because a lot of us are like, we can't get our hair cut. So we need to do something. I was on a board meeting the other day, and someone who normally has really long hair and is very femme identified, she and her partner just decided to just buzz their hair, and and she again is making kind of like some other life adjustments of expressing her femininity in ways while she has this buzz haircut. And it looked great and she felt really confident, but it took her many, many weeks to get to the point of feeling comfortable with that. But I think, Joanna, what you said about we're all kind of in the spot where, a lot of us are looking different right now because we don't have access to our regular barber, our regular stylist, or even our regular friends who would come over and help us braid or color or trim or whatever it is that we would normally do. So, it's kind of that balance of how do we be experimental and creative and use the resources we have and still feel comfortable in our bodies going forward. I'm aware that we have not made space for questions, for comments from folks that are have been listening. So I would like to open up and make sure that folks have a chance to comment or question or take us in a different direction, if you'd like. So again, you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you, or you can certainly make a comment or question in the chat box. So I see somebody is mentioning imagining a buzz cut with one of those cute little baby labeled, pink or blue headbands. I think that would be fantastic.
Have those?
You know, it could be a new fashion statement.
I never wear them, but like there's one like purple, since my hair used to be purple, like, and it sparkles and like, right, you know when like parents are desperate to somehow gender their children when they're still bald? It's basically those. I have a very small head, and so.
And we could get creative about that, right? I mean, you could make green ones, or you could make, you know, whatever that's like not pink or blue, and yeah, that would be really fun. So again, do folks have things that you would like to ask or comment on, or things that you might be struggling with in terms of staying safer and still expressing your gender and being affirmed as the gender that you are?
Yeah, and I would love to hear suggestions if people have tried things and maybe even if it didn't work out the way you wanted it to, and you'd be willing to share, you know, because that's certainly information we can share with other folks who might not be here today and are, you know, kind of dealing with some of the same challenges.
You know, one of the things that kind of is a common thread with this too is, you know, a lot of us are getting our groceries delivered, or we're picking them up, depending on what our finances are. But Shelley, like you were mentioning that, you know, Target, you could get your lipstick there. You could get a hair trimmer there. You could probably get those things at a grocery store as well and have them included in your delivery, which is a flat fee delivery. Or, you know, if you don't want to interact with a lot of people because you're worried about being misgendered, you could go to a pickup at your grocery store and you're only going to interact with one person. So instead of having to like walk up and down the aisles and you may come into contact with 15 people, if you schedule and pick up and it's free to pick up, you're only going to see one person. So they might misgender you, but it's only one person and you could prepare yourself for it and then drive away really fast. You know, so.
And most places like that actually won't let you get out of the car. So there's almost no human interaction, which is painful in some ways, but can also be a safety space. Because you unlock your trunk and like they have to put it in your backseat or your trunk, you know, and if again you're in that space where you're having to wear a mask and they ask your name, you say your name, they throw it in your trunk, right? They're not looking to have interaction any more than they're required.
Exactly. So I mean that's another way just to kind of get away from having to interact with people and having them gender you in a way that may not be comfortable or in alignment.
Yeah, and I've done some pickups and had many of the experiences like Joanna described. Some stores are doing things differently. A lot of the stores will, you know, ask us to call or text or, you know, send some kind of electronic communication as we're getting to the store, or after we park in the area for the pickup. You know, so that is often the way that I have found I'm communicating who I am, which, you know, for me presents the non-COVID pre-existing sort of gendering issues because, you know, people hear my voice and they address me very differently on the phone than they address me in person. But I know that. And as you said, Michael, I try to prepare myself for that. And it does tend to be a very short interaction, you know, as Joanna indicated. The other thing I'd share, just so folks are ready for it, is that, you know, every now and then, like Home Depot, I needed to order something and go there. And the person started beating on my window and scared me quite a bit until I finally understood that they were asking to see my identification. So for some reason, they actually wanted to see my ID card at Home Depot. And so, you know, we can have that ready. You don't have to interact with that person. You don't have to talk to them. You don't have to roll down your window. They can see the ID card through the window, and, you know, all they need is your name, you know, to ensure that you're the person who ordered the, you know, the items they're giving you.
That's really scary, and hopefully that, you know, most people would know to maybe like wave at you in front of the window instead of like banging on your window. That's very alarming. And in those cases too, like people, if they don't have ID that aligns, I mean, that might be difficult. And so, you know, maybe if you're ordering something ahead of time, maybe you need to ask, you know, well, are you going to need my ID, or what do you need when I pick it up, so that at least you're emotionally prepared, even if you don't have something that's in alignment, so that you can, work it up before you go, or, if you have somebody that you are in close contact with that you're not distancing from, you could bring them with you for emotional support or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of the stores are providing that information up front because these are new processes for the most part that most of us are using. Like Pick and Save now, when you log on to the Pick and Save website, there's just a very huge FAQ, so frequently asked questions section, and a lot of that has to do with what's the protocol for the pickup, how do I communicate, what do you expect of me? What should I expect of you? Or that will come in an email confirmation with instructions about what that particular store, is going to be expecting you to do when you arrive.
And Shelley, you made another comment about like a phone interaction, and I know that a lot of folks are oftentimes misgendered on the phone, no matter what our gender vector is, no matter what we identify as. And I know when I answer the phone, for personal or for business, I often say my name when I answer the phone. So like if somebody's calling in, I'm going to state my name, and my name is generally considered, a male name, and most people associate Michael with he. That's not necessarily what I prefer, but like that is a way to signal to people what your gender is. It doesn't necessarily work the same way when you're calling out, but when somebody's calling you, you can try to signal them to what you are, who you are, and what your gender is. I don't know if there's other solutions around that, but it's, I think you can like change your caller ID on some phone systems so that what's going out or what's coming in, you can see what somebody's caller ID is. I don't know that every phone company lets you do that though.
That's actually a really interesting suggestion that I had not thought of before, Michael. I do know that, sometimes if we get into like the online place, the account, for our cell phones, and do a little digging, there are some changes that can be made to how the phone, what message it sends out when we call. So is it showing our number or not? And I think that's an interesting kind of suggestion, that we may have the ability to change the name that appears as well. I'm going to look into that.
I know that we have had our kid on our family plan, and I know with family plans or groups that have more than one user, we can assign any name to that non-primary user. So we were able to put his name in. We could have put anything in. Nobody would have known, because the carrier wouldn't have known who was using that phone. So.
Right. Well, and I think similarly, we can almost always hide the caller ID information as a backup option. Maybe if we can't affirmatively select the name that we do want to appear, we may be able to at least take off, if it's our legal name that is appearing, or, just a name that, we don't particularly want to be associated with, or don't want that to have to be the first, message or signal that somebody gets about who we are. We can usually generally hide those.
And it used to be dialing *67.
Yeah, it still is.
Is it? Okay.
And that'll do like a per use block. Right. So you dial *67, and then you dial the telephone number you're calling. And for that call, it won't show the ID, but we should be able to also call the cell phone company, or again, go online into the settings for the account. And generally you can turn that off on a more permanent basis. So then you don't have to do that *67 every time you call.
Which is irritating, right? I mean, a lot of times we have to dial a zillion numbers, and adding those 3 characters is even, another set to dial.
Yeah, and I would not remember. I wouldn't remember to do that every time. So I like to make my, Yeah,
cool. I know we've got 4 minutes left, so I want to make sure that if anybody wants to make a comment or a question, that's possible. I'm seeing that we're not a super chatty bunch today, and that is totally good. Um, so there's a question of, unrelated question, what is a t-shirt dress?
I can cover that because I sport these. It's basically a t-shirt, only it's big and long. It's fantastic. It's like it's glorious. It's like your t-shirt with a train on it.
Is it like a caftan or something, but just in a t-shirt material?
No, it's like, it feels like t-shirt material, and the top hat fits like a t-shirt would fit, and then it's just like got kind of a little at the end. Sometimes it goes a little bit so that it, in my case, hides bits that I am not interested in exaggerating. It's great. T-shirt dress. Best piece of information I've shared all day.
Excellent.
That's a dress I might consider wearing.
Yeah.
A t-shirt
like
dress.
Almost moo-moo-ish, but not totally like it's pretty great.
I like it.
That's cool. I'm wondering, since we have a moment, I made a very short poll because we want to make sure that folks are getting what they need. And this is just a little sample poll of maybe what topics people would be interested in. And I don't have the approval of everybody to do this, but I'm wondering if folks would be willing to take a moment, and we only were able to give folks like kind of fixed choices. But let me launch this poll and hopefully people can see it. If you'd be willing to, would you answer like what topics you'd like to hear Ask Events talk about? So medical information about COVID, medical information about trans issues in general, mental health, accessing social services, connecting with others, or something else. It won't allow us to allow you to type it in, but are folks willing to take a second? Can you see the poll, everybody? I'm hoping so. I'm guessing. I'm just gonna, if we can wait for just a second while this is going on. I'd also like to let folks know what's coming up, but let me just wait for a couple seconds while folks are inputting data.
It looks, Michael, in the chat box, like there might be, Heather maybe is not seeing the poll.
And Heather, that might be because of how you're accessing. I don't know. And if you're, as a panelist, you're not going to be able to see it. So any of us that are behind the scenes are not able to vote.
Right.
Okay. Well, it looks like a few people have voted, and I really appreciate that. So, because we're trying to make sure that we create programming that's fitting of what you all would like to see. So stay tuned for things too, because you likely will have some other maybe email polls or Facebook polls from us that are a little bit more specific than that to try to drill down about what you're interested in. Shelley or Joanna, before we wrap up, is there anything that you'd like to add as kind of a closing statement about this topic?
The only thing I would say is that I've really been inspired by a lot of the suggestions, both from Joanna and the chat box, and I've got a lot of ideas I hadn't thought about before, and feel like this might just also just be a nice thing to do and pass some time while we might be home with a little extra time on our hands, be thinking about how we might craft some clothing or accessories that help us express who we are. So I really appreciate the suggestions everyone has shared. And, again, as always, if folks want to talk further about any of these issues or related issues, folks can call us at Forge. And I'm sure we'll put that information in the chat box before we close out today, but we can continue these conversations one-on-one or have other conversations about, other resources or things that folks need. So certainly feel free to reach out.
I think similarly, there's been really, I've loved watching the conversation in the chat box. That has been great, and a lot of really wonderful suggestions. I just want to remind all of us, and I do this a lot, that this is not a static moment, right? This is a journey that we are in together. And so what's working today doesn't mean that it has to work for us tomorrow or next week. And this is, there's some evolution to this. And it's a good thing that we're finding ways to be creative and evolve around this. And I think when we have things that are working, it's really wonderful to have a space to be able to share those things. because isolation fosters a lot of things that are painful, but it can foster creativity. And when we can share that with our community, we're all better for it. So thank you for being here today.
Yeah, excellent. And I think I've learned new things today, which is always fun. And I love like hearing different ideas. And I wasn't able to follow everything in the chat box. So it sounds like the chat box was a hot zone today. And so I'm looking forward to going back and reading that. So Joanna, thank you for your smarts, especially around that whole cleaning thing. And that's like, and the whole dress thing, the t-shirt dress thing. Cool. And Shelly, hey, we've got it. So I mean, like really good information that's shared today. I know that we're at 2 o'clock, but I would love to just share what's coming up this week with folks if I can. If you need to lock off, we totally understand that. So again, this next week we have the same days schedule. So Tuesdays and Saturday are Ask events. So Tuesday's Ask event is at 6 o'clock at night, and it will be with Dr. Andy Petrol and Ann Brooks, who's a nurse at Medical College. And the topic is, my job is considered essential. How can I stay safer? And then Saturday's Ask, so next week Saturday, is low or no health insurance. You still deserve health care. So Joanna, you'll be doing that with Carolyn next week Saturday at 1 o'clock. Yay, it'll be fun. And then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday are Connect events, so they're more interactive and more engaging. So Wednesday is a fantastic opportunity. It's a book discussion with the book called Advice from the Lights. So it's a partnership with Woodland Pattern Books. They will send you a free book. You can pick up a free book at Woodland Pattern, and we'll talk about that book of poetry. We'll read some of them if you don't pick up the book ahead of time. So really cool event. Thursday is a more chat supportive event, and we're going to talk about things that bring us joy. So instead of focusing on all the things that are going wrong and we're having a hard time with, we're going to focus on what brings us joy. And then Fridays have been traditionally a game day. And so on this Friday, we were motivated yesterday. We're going to encourage folks to look at Google Earth and find a place that you find really exciting. So we did a show and tell a week ago. It was general show and tell. So we're encouraging folks to use Google Earth and find a place that you either love that you've been to, a place that you want to go and you want to share with people, and then we'll play a game that talks about trivia and games and places that people can go. So that is our Friday event. So I hope that folks can join us for any of those things. I put the link of where the upcoming events are in the chat box. So please come and find us and hang out with us again. You'll get a survey when we close out today, and I hope to see folks again. Thanks everybody for being here.
Thank you.
Joanna.
Thank you, Jill.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Bye. Thanks, Jill.